Welcome to this edition of Thought to Action, presented by the Herb London Center for Policy Research. I'm Chris Cordani, your host. If you enjoy our content, don't forget to hit that like button. Also, comment, share, and subscribe, or become a member of this channel. That's easy to do, and you can join in on a lot of fun and exclusive videos and lots of other great features. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Getter, and the website, londoncenter.org. Also, take a look at our Thought to Action Teespring store, where we offer all sorts of merchandise and new items coming soon. The link is in our description. Our national intelligence community is no stranger to criticism, but perhaps in recent years, questions about its performance and some of the three-letter Bureau's members as well as leaders' motives have become more commonplace, and rightfully so. We have an FBI agent provocateur from a while back who may have been the instigator to create the exaggerated situation on January 6, 2021. We've talked about that. A lot of other instances where feds have been dispersed throughout rumored protests, which didn't happen. Other issues when it came to the three-letter agencies and hiding information over the recent few years. We've talked about that as well. Now we have CIA Director William Burns, who at a recent Aspen Security Forum discussion said he was proud of the way the Afghanistan debacle was handled. That sounds crazy, so I brought real intelligent guys from the London Center for Policy Research here to talk about all of that. We have London Center for Policy Research President, Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer, Lieutenant Colonel British Army Tim Wilson, Senior Fellow at the London Center, and London Center Distinguished Fellow Navy Captain Pete O'Brien. Pete, you're betting leadoff on this one because I also understand Burns isn't really an intelligence professional. He's more of a career political bureaucrat, and he's not the only one these days.
Right, and that's I would say unfortunate truth is that very often we have the folks at the head of the intelligence community are not in fact intelligence professionals. The intelligence community is a strange beast, and to understand what we've got here, you'd really need to kind of jump back in time and look at how this was formed. This was formed in the wake of Pearl Harbor and the various Pearl Harbor commissions, which almost became a cottage industry. And President Truman's desire to have an organization that actually put together for him a picture of the world. And so this amalgamation of organizations was stood up in 1947. But interestingly enough, those organizations were structured to really do two things. One is to just sort of keep a general, if you will, filing cabinet, a giant database on what's going on in the world, what's where, who's doing what to whom, and also to provide the president and a few decision makers with, assessments, periodic, frequent assessments of what's happening, and to give alertment, an intelligence word, give alertment on clearly defined problems. The organization was set up to track clearly defined problems and alert somebody, the presidency and the senior guys, when something was happening inside of one of these problem sets. That's what it was designed to do. That's how it was organized. And interestingly enough, that's pretty much what it does fairly well. But the rest of the things that we want it to do are really sort of like asking the New York Yankees to be a better soccer team. It's simply not organized, manned, or equipped to do the things that we want it to do. And so, and I'm not defending anybody here. In many cases, the intelligence community is wrongly pilloried for failure to do X, Y, and Z, when really, in fact, they weren't designed to do X, Y, and Z. They were designed to do something else. And there's a whole bunch of bureaucratic arguments for they're too bloated, they're too this, they're too that. Those are mostly true for most of the organisms of government. But in many cases, the specific things they were organized to do, they still do pretty well. But it's all the other stuff that they don't do well, and it doesn't help, sadly, when we put someone like Ambassador Negroponte, a wonderful man, brilliant guy, we tell him to set up the Directorate of National Intelligence. Horrible mistake, compounded mistake, because It simply wasn't in his, you know, I'm losing the term, but it wasn't in his swing. That's not the kind of hitter he was, and we asked him to do something really he wasn't equipped to do. And I think that in so many respects is what we find in a number of these large organizations. CIA does it frequently. They wind up with interesting people in charge, but they're not intelligence officers.
So, and if I could continue the thought on that, is that Pete and I have spent a lot of time in service. I'll just say that because I think Pete's time was primarily in uniform. I was both civilian and military during my time. We witnessed, from the tactical level to the strategic level, the various behaviors of leaders within the intelligence community and how they respond to their political masters. And that's what they do. Many of them respond to the political masters rather than attempting to maintain a level of detachment from the political class and tell the truth. And I think that's where we're at. So one of the grand ironies of being an effective intelligence officer, either an analyst and manager like Pete, or an operative, I'd like to put myself in a successful category like myself, is that the best operations that you run will never be known. Right, Pete? I mean, the greatest things we've done will not be told about in our generation. It's just, you can't without jeopardizing real stuff. I mean, suffice to say. And Pete and I were involved in some things that are truly amazing, spectacular, and I still can't believe I had the privilege of working in those operations.
And which rightly should never see the light of day.
Which rightly should never see the light of day, and the American people would be very proud of what was done in their name. Now, to contrast that is Bill Burns, because what you have then is, outside of the operational and most strategic capabilities, you have this political class who have essentially taken over the management of the intelligence community. And I would fault the intelligence community beyond the basic flaws that Pete just pointed out. They've adapted a philosophy of measures of performance versus measures of effectiveness. And one of the most effective operations ever in history of the intelligence community was something called Operation Bodyguard. Operation Bodyguard was the deception operation, which maybe Tim will speak to a little bit, or not, I don't know. But the Double X Committee, the 20 Committee, Committee of 20, effectively managed the most effective intelligence deception in the history of warfare. Amazing stuff. I have a book right over here, Bodyguard of Lies, Anthony K. Brown, highly recommend, couldn't recommend more. It goes through and breaks down the politics and necessary steps to be effective. So that to me was a measure of effectiveness operation. Did you fool the Germans? Do they think you're going somewhere else? And can you use the lie to continue to deceive them even after you got troops on the ground? Very, very simple objectives, but the complexity that was required to get there to those three was mind-numbing, but it was done. And the effect and the measure of effectiveness was, did you successfully get on the beaches on the 6th of June and stay? And the answer is yes. So we've lost that. We've lost that completely, because now Burns, being a non-intelligence officer, has probably been told by his staff, well, all the measures of performance, oh, we did a certain number of reports, we read a certain number of reports, we spent this much budget, we got this much budget, we spent it. We did everything we could. We did everything within our power. And that is why he's saying, yeah, it's good enough. Yeah, we didn't get it right, but we don't care. It was all about the performance. We performed to the standard that was necessary. And those standards are based on arbitrary, artificial performance elements, which have nothing to do with effectiveness. And that's where we're at. As long as you are more than willing to appease the politicians, then you'll continue to be promoted. And that's where we're at. We have political appeasement versus ground truth. Those are the two things that are in conflict. And the leaders we have today, Burns, Scotty Barrier, I hope you listen, Scotty, and the other knuckleheads who are at the top of the community, have completely sold out any interest in holding themselves or the people below them to a standard of effectiveness rather than an artificial level of performance. Now think about this. We've had general after general, State Department official after all go through the churn of Afghanistan. And everybody has gotten nice medals out of it. Everybody's gotten nice promotions out of it, but we lost. And no one seems to be concerned about the fact that we lost. And to me, this Afghanistan thing, as the most specific example, was foreseen. They keep saying, "Oh, we had no idea." Yes, they did. I had a conversation with Mike Pompeo over this, and I said specifically, the one thing you cannot ignore is the Pakistani ISI. Excuse me. If you ignore the Pakistani ISI, you will see it fail, because they have the one and most important vote in the region. And if you ignore them, if you don't bring them in and have them leading the process with you, you will see catastrophic failure.
Explain who they are, Tony.
Oh, the Pakistani Intelligence Service. The Pakistani Intelligence Service has been that organization which was very effective in helping us against the Russians, the Soviets in the 70s and 80s. But at the same time, they have their own interests and equities. And the Pakistani Intelligence Service is the father. Hamid Gul, my old friend Hamid Gul, General Gul was the creator of the Taliban. And he and the Pakistani Intelligence Service, the retirees, not the active guys, were the ones who managed the Taliban on behalf of the Pakistani government. Still do. And so, and by the way, they're the ones who hid bin Laden at Abbottabad as well. Just saying, it wasn't the Pakistani active; it was the generals, retired generals. When you consider the ISI, you have to consider the fact that they are extra legal. They do not respond to the politicians of Pakistan, and at the same time, they have the interest of Pakistan in heart. They believe that, and therefore they're the ones who were ignored by both the Trump administration and by the Obama administration, and were there Johnny on the spot to help the Taliban retake control of Afghanistan after the tragic events of the summer of last year. So just saying, that was something that was given. I gave warning. A lot of us gave warning, but it was ignored. So when you have Burns saying, "Oh well, we got at least less wrong than everybody else," it's still wrong. And it's going to be wrong because they're not willing to hear the facts of the reality which we face in all these situations. So
that was disturbing, very disturbing when he said, "We got it at least less wrong than the rest of the parts of the government here." But we look at the Biden administration, and you're pretty sure that they're going to get everything less wrong than them. So it's like saying, "Well, I think we were better than the Reds this year."
Well, I mean, yeah, obviously,
the 62 Mets weren't that bad.
I come at this from a very different angle because Tony and Pete are the ones with real experience with the American intelligence community. But they've highlighted 2 points that are, if you like, general to professional intelligence work. One is that it's actually Operation Bodyguard is a very good book to read for other purposes as well, in that it highlights the complexity of what seems like a relatively simple idea. Deceive the Germans about where the troops are going to land on D-Day. Nice, simple concept, simple mission. Really, really complicated and difficult to achieve. And as Tony said, politics came in, a whole raft of things came in.
oh yeah,
The way they did it was genius, but it was also genius in terms of a whole raft of intelligence professionals were involved. And as Pete is pointing out, when you have intelligence professionals involved, their focus needs to be on achieving the goal. What is the mission? What is the aim? That is something the military are very good at generally, but as you get higher up the ranks in the military, you become less mission-oriented and more goal-oriented. And the problem with senior leadership is that it's very hard to stay on what is truly the mission, especially if you're not a professional who understands through years of practice the ins and outs. And that's one of the reasons why having political appointees in charge is a great idea in concept, as long as they are only high level managing things and never involved in day-to-day operations. And that's where another one of the big failings comes in this country, in my view. I'm when I arrived here, was horrified by the number, just the pure number of intelligence agencies, and coordinating those at a strategic level is a heck of a task. It's not the task of a politician or a political appointee. It needs to have professional oversight. That professional oversight, by all means, have that report to political appointees. But the head of intelligence in this country and the heads of each of the agencies need to be professional intelligence operatives, and they're not.
And if I can add something in here, one of the problems, and you'll find that this is true virtually across the intelligence community, is we don't keep score. And let me jump backwards here. Look behind me, to anyone who's watching, there's an aircraft carrier. In the ready rooms of those carriers, every ready room on every carrier in the US Navy, there's a board on the wall. It's called a greenie board. Doesn't matter whether you're an ensign, the skipper of the squadron, might even be the air wing commander if you happen to fly with that squadron. Every single one of your landings on the ship is graded, and the grade is posted. And if the wing commander or the skipper are getting lousy grades, and the grading is very fair, if you're getting lousy grades, everybody knows it. This matter of keeping score has a very real tactical application, because you want to make sure people get aboard the boat first pass, and you keep the interval low. The interval during the day, the interval is supposed to be 45 seconds. So it has to be done. We keep score. We correct people when they get it wrong. We ride them hard if they keep getting it wrong. In the intelligence community, there is no keeping score. And every time someone has raised the issue of keeping score, officially, really honest to God keeping score, there's a hue and cry. But the fact of the matter is, here's the other side of that. If you run an intelligence organization, you know the guys in your organization. You know which ones have a good batting average and which ones have a lousy batting average. And guess who you trust? You trust the guys with good batting average. And if you're a commander someplace, you're the 4-star in this or that theater, and you have bad things going on in your theater, you have a guy who is your intelligence officer. Now, he may not be, in fact, labeled as the intelligence officer. He may be the number 2 guy, number 3 guy, but I'll guarantee you, there is a guy that the 4-star trusts. And that guy is the de facto intelligence officer. Right. And he's the one that the 4-star is going to drag into his office by himself and say, hey, what's going on? Now, translate that to Washington, D.C. There needs to be somebody at the top of near the top of the intelligence community who is the guy or gal, doesn't matter who it is, that the president, when things are getting really ugly and tight and people are staying up late, there is that one individual that he grabs, drags into his office, kicks the door shut and says, what is going on? That guy needs to be a professional. And what would happen, one of our problems we're having right now is that guy isn't. And I'll add one more thought. There was a fascinating character named Michael Handel, who's a professor at Naval War College. And he used to make a point. He said, it doesn't matter if you're wrong, you need to convince your boss that you're right. It doesn't matter if you're right. You need to convince your boss you're right. If your boss doesn't accept what you're saying, you've failed. And that idea that, hey, we told them, but they didn't believe it, that doesn't count. You need to make sure they believe it. And that too is missing from the current discussion about the intelligence.
And the willingness to have people take on and have the courage to basically stomp their foot to that point to say, you need to listen, right, has been removed from most intelligence officers. And I think that's the thing that's tragic, is that because of people who simply are trying to tell the truth to get their attention are often seen as disruptive and non-team players. You're not a good bureaucrat. You're not going along with the flow, and therefore you're going to be shuffled out. And I think that's the real danger here. On the operation in particular, one of the operations that I refer to, Carolina Morning, is the unclassified nickname. It's in my retirement bio. Pete knows what it is. And basically, that operation was run despite bureaucrats not wanting to do it. Oh, this is going to be too hard, too dangerous, and I don't want to do it. A wise general, Chuck Scanlon, said, "No, you're going to do it," and he gave it to me to do for better or for worse. And then from that point on, it took work to make sure that people paid attention to it. And in this case, the right people did pay attention to it because it was important. Some of the intel was ignored, I might add, which I don't want to get into because it's still technically classified, but it was ignored at the peril of things we're now dealing with 30 years later. But point being is that it took courage and wisdom of general officers to allow operators and analysts to figure out how to best use this information. And it was used effectively. As a matter of fact, I would argue so effectively that we did not see a conflict in the Korean Peninsula. And I think there are several times that we could have had a hot war there. And I think this operation in particular helped divert that, helped stop it.
One of the greatest lessons that the British learned from the American military was the after-action review. And I think on both sides, when you have an after-action review, poor performance usually results in some form of corrective action. It
Right.
seems as if in the modern bureaucratic layout of our entire government, and I include, sadly, the military, after-action reviews where something is found to be wrong do not necessarily result in corrective action and almost never result in true punitive action against those responsible.
Well, it's beyond that, though, Tim. One of the things that happened, and I'll let Pete jump into this in a second, is that some of the other operations that Pete was involved in later, when I was at Defense Intelligence Agency, I did a number of really cool things. I led a team that did cool things, I should say. I didn't do them, I managed them, and we did a great job as a team. My point being is that at one point I was called in by my boss, who was the director of operations, a guy named Colonel Jerry York, the grandson of Sergeant York. And when he was going to leave, Pat Hughes, the director, Lieutenant General Pat Hughes, was going to leave. Basically, Jerry called me and said, you need to leave. Why do I need to leave? Because you've done things which have pissed off everybody else. And the bottom line was, I was told to do certain missions. I did those missions. I was promoted and supported. But the moment that Army leadership who wanted things done was going to leave, they knew that the bureaucracy, which didn't want any of this, was going to come after me. And the only reprise I had was with Tom Wilson. When Tom came in as the director, as another operational guy who I dealt with, Tom was the guy who put it off a little bit. But I'm just saying that there are officers like Tom Wilson, Pat Hughes, Jerry York, Bob Harding, who wanted things done, and therefore my job was to get them done. And I didn't care if the bureaucracy liked it or not. That included the politicians within that bureaucracy, but there was a price to pay, obviously. So
the question here is the transition. When did it become, hey, we need intelligence people leading intelligence agencies? And I like it better when the bureaucrats are running, because it keeps us political people in charge.
It keeps them happy. It doesn't keep them in charge. Just
yeah, that's right.
Control
in charge
an
on
illusion.
paper, I should say.
Yes.
There you go. On
Yes.
paper. There we go. But where was that line? I'm sure I know it was a transition, but where did it start and end? It's here.
The really strict transition that took place, I think, was and up until the formation of the Office of National Intelligence, Office of the Director of National Intelligence, in 2004.
By the way, done by a diplomat named Negroponte, not even an intelligence officer.
And a smart guy, but just not the right guy for this. And everybody has their strengths and weaknesses. This was one of his weaknesses. But the real transition really took place after, again, we need to jump back in history here, after the Watergate hearings and then the Church Committee hearings on the intelligence community operations in the 60s and 70s. And prior to the forming of the ODNI, the intelligence community was run by the Director of Central Intelligence, who was also the director of the CIA. So he had actually two hats. One was he ran the entire community. The other was he ran the CIA. And what happened under Carter, after the Church Committee hearings, Carter brought in his guy, who was a classmate of his at the Naval Academy, who was a 3-star admiral who wanted to be a 4-star admiral and he wanted to be I think think land, and then he wanted to be the CNO, Stan Turner, but instead he became the director of Central Intelligence. And he did not view the intelligence community the way the intelligence community viewed the intelligence community. And of course, he had 51% of the vote, if you will. And so he changed things. And that's really where you see there's a very real transition that starts taking place in the intelligence community in the late 70s.
So let's take it further. How do we fix this whole thing? When will somebody step in and say, all right, this is enough? I know it looks nice to have somebody I can, again, on paper, control when I'm president or when I'm hiring people. It's time to put real intelligence people in these positions.
It isn't going to happen, and I can tell you why.
Yeah.
Straightforward. It's about money and power basically in Washington, which is now the largest spout of, or I don't know what you want to call it, well of money in the world. And if you look at the people that are going there and trying to get jobs there and scrabbling around, they're all after one thing, money, or it's the same, it's two different versions of the same thing, money and power. And unless somebody actually goes in and does what needs to be done to our government and gets rid of the waste, the abuse, the jobs for friends, jobs for boys, jobs for people that will support me, jobs in exchange for, and money in exchange for support, and contracts in exchange for support, it isn't going to change significantly.
Right.
So we can still hire people who are competent, right? We can still hire people who won't stand up in front of a microphone and say, well, we really screwed this up, but we screwed up less than we thought. So I think it's a good thing.
So that's a leadership issue. So Tim is correct that the people in power see power through the lens of the number of people you have working for you and your budget. They could care less about the effect. As a matter of fact, NSA for decades has been overly bloated, and the idea is give us all the money and we'll guarantee that something will happen to prevent a tragedy, which they can't. They never do, but they keep that premise going. And this is a quick little story to illustrate what Tim's saying. I was in briefing Steve Cambone, on an operation that Director Wilson, wanted me to do regarding a Navy issue. And my team and I had figured out how to do it. And the annual budget for the operation, this was the first of its kind, never been done before, had to do with internet, very complex internet stuff. The annual budget was going to be $20,000 a year, and most of that was travel. And the Pentagon had paid for a very similar project the year before, and someone had charged them $1.8 million. So, and I'm sitting there, and Pete knows Tom Wilson. I'm sitting there because I was asked the question. I gave the answer. How much is this going to cost us? I said, I don't know, 15, 20K a year. And Cambone just said, what? What? And he looked over at Tom Wilson and said, we just paid for something like this. And so Tom just basically says, yeah, don't say anything more. Like, I'm just telling the truth, because the truth is, with the people I had, we could have done it for 20K, even though some smart contractor had said, oh yeah, we'll do it for 1.8 million. And that's the game. That right there is the game. That illustrates the game.
Does it? I have to ask the two professionals here, Chris. Forgive me for this.
Yeah, don't worry about it. Nobody wants to know what.
Doesn't it? No,
I'm just kidding.
Actually, you can comment on this.
I'm only kidding. I'm only kidding.
It seems to me like you get a group of people together that really have capabilities and what have you, and it starts as a fairly small group, and then it grows and grows and grows. And if you like, a bit like the CIA, it reaches a critical mass. And once it hits that critical mass, whatever it might be, suddenly it is all about budgets and ticking boxes.
That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. Is that And I'm not, and that's not just with the intelligence community. If you look at, geez, just look at any weapon procurement program in DoD. I have a couple of friends who call me up routinely, all completely unclassified, open source stuff, but they'll connect numbers for you, and they're scary. It's just the way the money is spent. But you need to put it in perspective here. The intelligence community, I forget what they release the number every year, 1 year late, but the intelligence community, I'm pretty sure we're over $60 billion a year in 200,000 people in the intelligence community, among the 16 or 17 offices, bureaus, agencies, whatever they're called.
Yeah.
And 200,000 people, 60 plus billion dollars, plus a whole bunch of contractors, taking little pieces of that, sometimes big pieces of that. There's a whole lot of institutional inertia that just wants to keep that money flowing. And
yeah.
And again, we get back into one of the things Tony was saying about how you measure effectiveness. From the people who are inside the Beltway, who are involved in that process, and this is in the intelligence community and in the other huge spending programs, some of which are much larger than the intelligence community. The important thing is not outcome. The important thing is input. You measure input.
Yep.
How much money came into us? How many jobs will be given? How many full-time equivalents do we have? You measure those inputs. No one is going to try and measure outcomes. Outcomes are 5 years out.
Right.
And 5 years from now, I'm going to have switched companies. I'm no longer going to be working for XYZ Corp. I'm going to be working for ABC Corp. And now I've gotten a promotion. So, I'm not worried about the outcome. I'm worried about the input. I brought, one gazillion dollars worth of contracts into XYZ Corp. I go to ABC Corp and say, so you guys should give me twice as much money as I'm getting for XYZ. And that kind of dance is going on at lower and lower levels. It goes through much of the organization, the U.S. government organization. And it just is sadly, it is the nature of the beast. To fix that, you would need to have, I think you would need to have three things. You would need to have a defining event that allows everybody to stand up and say, oh my God. You then need a president who understands the complexity of the problem that has just dropped on his desk and can say, I'm going to pick you, Chris Cordani, to fix this because I know you're the guy. And then you need the right people in Congress that you can go down to them and say, I need to explain to you what we're about to do and why we're going to do this massive change in some of the things we're doing because we have the wrong people in the wrong places, the wrong organizations that it needs to be fixed. And we have some organizations that need to be sort of cut in two, and that the part of them remain doing exactly what they're doing now because we still need to do that.
Right. So I to back up Pete, I would, if I were in charge of the DNI, I would first off eliminate DNI. I would put it back to the Pentagon and basically let Pentagon manage the entire intelligence apparatus. It's not popular, but it's what I would do because CIA cannot be trusted to be left to its own devices. So CIA does what CIA wants, no matter what anybody says. And then the primary driver of intelligence should be, in my judgment, two commands: Special Operations Command and cyber command, because that's where the world really is going now. And SOCOM has been, in my judgment, the most effective manager of clandestine stuff because they have to be. Little known is that the U.S. Army provides a great deal of support to Special Operations Command even now that we don't talk about, and that's fine. It should be that way. And then, like Pete knows, and I've talked about this on and off air, it wasn't just the Navy SEALs at Abbottabad, just saying. So it was a spectrum of support. And I'm pretty sure that Army aviators flew those guys in, just saying. Anyway, and I would take the intelligence community, cut the people by half and the budget by about a third. And then I would give what's left real authority. And I wouldn't do it, like fire everybody. I would trit people down. One of the most effective things done by the Reagan folks that people tend to forget is that during Reagan's second term, he stopped all DoD hiring. All government hiring was stopped. You could only replace people. As a matter of fact, when I was hired in 1987 to come to Washington as a civilian, I had to wait until October of 87 because I could only go into a billet once someone retired. There's ways of doing this without jeopardizing whatever the perception is of the politicians, that you're going to jeopardize the ability to collect. I would argue you would never jeopardize that by being effective in managing and getting rid of billets and cutting budgets.
Well, and particularly when you start looking at who you're going to keep and who you're going to get rid of.
Oh yeah.
How are you going to parse them up? This is,
Yeah.
there's no risk at all. You can do some massive cuts without any risk to the actual awareness the intelligence community has of what's going on around the world.
Yep.
You can also change the mindset to go back to being mission-oriented, success-oriented. When was the last time the US scored a victory, a real victory in war?
Oh, I'm not sure. I remember watching Stripes where Bill Murray was going, "Hey, we're America. We're 10-1." But that was back then.
Yeah.
I think we got the
Well,
we got
so
the
we
Iraq
did.
War,
I mean,
if you want to count that.
the last time, the two conflicts that we used overwhelming force in and won effectively was obviously Gulf One and Gulf Two. Gulf One, I think, was an effective demonstration of what the U.S. military can do if it was called upon for a conventional war. All that hardware, software, everything was designed to take on the Warsaw Pact. I think the Iraqis were never going to win that because, yeah, we were ready to go against a peer, Russia, Soviets, and we clearly, I think our tactics would have won the day as well as our weapons. Gulf Two, it's like, yeah, it can't. It's not a good measure of effectiveness. And I know the British were there for both battles, and again, I don't think it was a true challenge of our militaries in any great degree. So, but yeah, it's a, and I don't know if we could take on a near peer right now, the United States. So I'm just saying.
I suspect we could still go and take on the alphabetical list through the Middle East, but
it is true though that from the perspective of the intelligence community and the perspective of framing a situation so that you understand what it is that you must do as a nation to achieve what are meaningful strategic goals. The intelligence community, arguably, this is in the words of one of the directors of the CIA, Bobby Ray Inman. This was after he had left the CIA. This was in the late 80s. Made the statement that the intelligence community has not gotten a strategic problem right since World War II.
Well, at least they know what pronouns to use now. That's good, right? There's that.
There's that.
So, according to John Brennan, CIA was the premier employer of gay and lesbians at one point. So they got that going for them, I guess, which if that's a measure of effectiveness, I guess that's, no, I got that straight from Jim Woolsey. Jim told me that straight out. So I just got a briefing, and according to to John Brennan, that's just what CIA's focus is. So.
The Huffington Post will be very, very happy. I want to thank all of you for being with us for this edition of Thought to Action, presented by the Herb London Center for Policy Research. Please hit that like button. Feel free to comment on our discussion. That's if you like it. If you don't like us, we'd like to hear your comments as well. We want to know what you think. We appreciate your thoughts. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to our Thought to Action channel or become a member. If you really like us, we have membership opportunities available. Find out more about the center at our website, londoncenter.org. Also, pick up some merch from our cool Thought to Action Teespring store. The link is in the description. For our panel at the Herb London Center for Policy Research, I'm Chris Cordani. Thank you, stay informed, and make your day a great one.